Hey bookworms, welcome back to Book Dive. So, if you're anything like me and you love squeezing in some self-improvement during your morning commute, well, this episode is definitely for you. Today we're diving deep into Brené Brown's Daring Greatly. This book really honestly changed the way I think about courage and connection and just living a wholehearted life.
It's a powerful read for sure. Brown's work really challenges all of us to kind of rethink our relationship with vulnerability and how it really shapes our lives.
Exactly. Get ready to explore why vulnerability is not the weakness we've been led to believe,
Mm?
but actually the key to unlocking deeper connections, greater courage, and a more authentic way of being in the world.
Yeah, you might even say it's the key to daring greatly, which is what we'll be unpacking today.
Okay, let's dive right in. One of the most impactful ideas in Daring Greatly is Brown's assertion that vulnerability, while often perceived as a weakness, is actually the birthplace of courage, compassion, and connection. It's like she's flipping the script on everything we thought we knew about strength and resilience.
It is a pretty radical idea, isn't it? I mean, we're conditioned to believe that we need to be tough and put on a brave face and never let them see you sweat, right? But Brown argues that it's actually in those moments of vulnerability, when we allow ourselves to be seen with all our imperfections and everything, that we forge the deepest connections and experience true belonging.
Yeah, it's like that moment in her TED Talk where she describes being terrified to step onto that stage. But knowing that her message about vulnerability was just too important to keep hidden, she dared greatly, and it sparked a global conversation.
And that TED Talk is a perfect example of how vulnerability can be contagious, right? When we see someone who's brave enough to share their story, it gives us permission to do the same, creates this ripple effect of courage and connection.
Right, and it's not about becoming an open book and sharing every single detail of our lives with everyone we meet, right? It's about being selective, discerning about who we let into our inner circle, and knowing that it's okay to set boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. Vulnerability is about being authentic and allowing ourselves to be seen. But it's not about oversharing or burdening others with our emotional baggage. It's about choosing the right people at the right time and sharing from a place of genuine connection and trust.
And Brown uses this great analogy to illustrate the building of trust. The marble jar.
Think of it this way. Every time we show up authentically, keep a promise, or offer support, we're adding a marble to the jar. Each act of vulnerability, big or small, strengthens the foundation of trust.
But here's the catch. Just like trust takes time and effort to build, it can also be eroded one marble at a time through betrayals or disengagements.
And those betrayals don't always have to be dramatic or malicious, right?
hmm
It can be those small, everyday moments when someone consistently cancels plans, or doesn't follow through on commitments, or simply stops putting effort into the relationship.
It's those little things that slowly chip away at the foundation of trust, leaving us feeling depleted and disconnected. Speaking of feeling depleted, let's move on to another key theme in Daring Greatly. The never enough culture. It's this pervasive feeling that we're never quite good enough, successful enough, thin enough, you name it. Brown really hits a nerve with this one.
Yeah, it's something most of us can relate to on some level, right? We live in a culture that constantly tells us we need to be more, do more, have more, and it just leaves us feeling exhausted and inadequate and just perpetually striving for something that's just out of reach.
Before we dive deeper into that, just a quick reminder to our awesome listeners. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. We appreciate your support. Okay, back to the never enough monster. Brown argues that this culture of scarcity is deeply intertwined with shame.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. We feel shame about not being enough, which drives us to strive for external validation and achievement, which only perpetuates the feeling that we're still not enough. It's exhausting.
Totally. It's like we're on this hamster wheel of striving, but never quite arriving. So how do we break free from this exhausting cycle? What's the antidote to the never enough mentality?
Well, according to Brown, it all comes down to shame resilience. Shame resilience is the ability to recognize shame, understand its triggers, and develop strategies for coping with it in a healthy way. It's not about avoiding shame altogether because, as Brown points out, shame is a universal human emotion. We all experience it from time to time.
So it's not about pretending shame doesn't exist or trying to bury it deep down.
Exactly. Shame resilience is about learning to navigate shame in a way that doesn't define us or hold us back from living a wholehearted life.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do we actually build shame resilience?
Well, Brown outlines 4 key elements: recognizing shame, practicing critical awareness, reaching out, and speaking shame. Let's break them down.
Sounds like a plan. Let's start with recognizing shame. What does that actually look like in practice?
It starts with paying attention to our bodies and emotions. Shame often manifests physically, like a sinking feeling in your stomach, flushed cheeks, or the urge to just hide or disappear. Emotionally, it can show up as feelings of worthlessness, inadequacy, or self-doubt.
Those are definitely feelings I've experienced before. So once we recognize those shame signals, what's next?
That's where critical awareness comes in. It's about learning to challenge those negative thoughts and beliefs that shame throws our way. For example, if your inner critic starts telling you that you're a failure because you made a mistake at work, shame resilience would involve questioning that thought. Is it really true that one mistake defines your entire worth as an employee?
It's like those pesky inner gremlins we all have, always whispering doubts and criticisms in our ears. Shame resilience is about learning to talk back to those gremlins and put their negativity in perspective.
Precisely. It's about separating truth from shame-based narratives. The third element, reaching out, is all about connection. Shame thrives in isolation, so sharing our experiences with trusted friends, family members, or even a therapist can help us break free from its grip.
It's like that saying, shame dies in the light. When we bring our shame out into the open, we often find that we're not alone in our struggles.
Absolutely. And the final element of shame resilience is speaking shame. This means giving voice to our experiences and refusing to let shame control us. It's about challenging the cultural norms and expectations that fuel shame, and advocating for ourselves and others.
So it's about reclaiming our power and refusing to let shame dictate our worth.
Exactly. Speaking shame can involve setting boundaries, having courageous conversations, or simply saying no to things that don't align with our values.
It sounds like a pretty powerful toolkit for navigating the inevitable ups and downs of life.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put these daring greatly principles into action in our everyday lives?
That's a great question. Brown provides some really insightful advice on how we can practice vulnerability in key areas like parenting, the workplace, and relationships. Let's start with parenting.
Okay, so let's talk about raising brave kids in a world that often tells them to be perfect, tough, and put themselves first. How can we, as parents, foster a sense of vulnerability and resilience in our children?
Well, it starts with modeling vulnerability ourselves. Our kids are watching us, and they learn more from our actions than our words. If we're constantly trying to appear perfect and in control, well, they'll learn to do the same. But if we show them that it's okay to make mistakes, ask for help, and express our emotions, they'll be more likely to embrace their own vulnerability.
So it's about showing them that it's okay to be human, imperfections and all.
Exactly. Another important aspect of daring greatly in parenting is letting go of the need to control our children's experiences. It's natural to want to protect our kids from pain and disappointment, but sometimes the best thing we can do is step back and allow them to struggle.
It's like that analogy of teaching someone to ride a bike. You can hold on for a while, but eventually you have to let go so they can find their own balance.
Exactly. By allowing our kids to experience adversity within reasonable limits, of course, we help them develop resilience and problem-solving skills and a sense of agency.
So daring greatly in parenting means letting go, allowing our kids to struggle, and creating a safe space for them to be vulnerable and authentic. What about the workplace? How do we dare greatly in a setting that often values competition and stoicism over vulnerability and collaboration?
It starts with leadership. Leaders who model vulnerability and create a culture of psychological safety where employees feel comfortable taking risks, sharing ideas, and even admitting mistakes are more likely to foster innovation and creativity.
It's like that example Brown gives in the book about the financial advising firm where the top performer gets to choose their office each quarter. That sounds like a recipe for cutthroat competition and fear of failure, not exactly a breeding ground for vulnerability and trust.
You got it. It's a system designed to reward individual achievement over collaboration and teamwork. Instead, Brown suggests focusing on creating a culture where vulnerability is seen as a strength, not a weakness. A culture where people feel safe to speak up, share their ideas, and ask for help without fear of judgment or reprisal.
That sounds like a much more supportive and inspiring environment to work in. Okay, let's talk relationships. How does daring greatly play out in our romantic relationships, friendships, and family dynamics?
It's about being authentic, setting boundaries, and having courageous conversations. It's about showing up as our true selves even when it feels scary, and allowing others to do the same.
So it's about fostering a sense of safety and trust where we can be vulnerable with each other without fear of judgment or rejection.
Exactly. And it's also about being willing to have difficult conversations, to address conflict directly and respectfully, and to set boundaries when needed.
It's about recognizing that vulnerability is a two-way street. It's about being willing to be both seen and to see others.
Beautifully put. It's about recognizing that true intimacy and connection come from allowing ourselves to be fully known and loved, flaws and all.
Wow, this conversation is making me realize just how much I still have to learn about daring greatly. It's so much more than just being willing to be vulnerable. It's about cultivating shame resilience, setting boundaries, having courageous conversations, and creating a culture of vulnerability in all areas of our lives.
It's definitely a journey, not a destination, but the rewards are well worth the effort.
Before we wrap up, just a quick reminder to our listeners. If you're finding this deep dive insightful, we'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments section. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out the affiliate link in the description to pick up a copy of Daring Greatly.
It's a book that has the potential to change your life.
It really is. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive into Daring Greatly, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the difference between vulnerability and oversharing. Because there's a fine line between being authentic and just dumping our emotional baggage on unsuspecting bystanders.
It's an important distinction. Vulnerability, as Brené Brown emphasizes, is rooted in connection and trust. It's about sharing from a place of genuine intimacy and mutual respect. Oversharing, on the other hand, can sometimes stem from a place of insecurity or a need for validation.
Okay, so how do we know when we're crossing that line? When does vulnerability turn into something less helpful or even harmful?
Well, Brown offers some great guidelines in the book. She suggests starting by clarifying our intentions. Why are we sharing this information? What outcome are we hoping for? Is it to connect with someone, seek support, or simply process our own emotions?
So it's about being mindful of the why behind our sharing. It's not just about word vomit, but about being intentional and considering the impact our words might have on the other person.
Exactly. It's also crucial to consider the context and the relationship. Are we sharing with someone we trust? Have we established a foundation of mutual respect and understanding? And are they in a place to receive what we're sharing?
I think it's also important to pay attention to our own energy and motivations. Are we sharing from a place of genuine connection? Or are we trying to force intimacy or manipulate the other person?
That's such a great point. Sometimes we can use vulnerability as a way to hotwire connection, especially if we're feeling insecure or lonely. But true connection can't be forced. It has to be built on a foundation of mutual trust and respect.
So daring greatly isn't about being fearless or invulnerable. It's about embracing the messiness of life, showing up authentically, and knowing that we're worthy of love and belonging, even with all our imperfections.
Beautifully said. It's about recognizing that our vulnerability, when shared with the right people in the right way, is not a weakness, but a superpower. It's the key to unlocking deeper connections, experiencing greater joy and meaning, and living a more wholehearted life.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What's one small act of courage you can take today? What's one area of your life where you can practice vulnerability and dare greatly?
It could be having an honest conversation with a loved one, setting a boundary, or simply saying no to something that doesn't align with your values. Remember, courage is contagious, and even the smallest act of vulnerability can have a ripple effect, inspiring others to do the same.
Until next time, keep diving deep, bookworms.